First of all, I must compliment both the speakers, Air Chief Marshal Krishnamurthy and Ashey Tellis. Uh, I thought both speeches were very good, and particularly what Ashey said, um, it was good in a way because there are many things that we in India have been saying that, and those are not accepted. Those, I've been talking about limited war right from Kargil days onwards. And we've had but it is good to hear that coming from another Indian, but who's not actually an Indian, he's now a non-resident Indian.
No.
But I was quite very pleased to see some of the remarks that he made, particularly about not having that instinct to develop ourselves into a power of this thing. He also, the only thing I have to ask you, Ashey, is you said that we should not over-invest in our nuclear capability particularly. I tend to agree with that, but I hope that is not against our development of the triad. Thank you.
Ashey?
No, I was not referring to any particular issue of force architecture. I just wanted to make the general point that the only military capabilities worth investing in are the capabilities that can actually be used to attain certain outcomes. Nuclear capabilities buy you homeland defense. That's about the only thing they're good for. And if you think a triad is what you require to develop those capabilities, then by all means, get them. But don't waste more when less is enough.
Ashey, may I use my moderator status to ask you a question that follows up on what General Malik said? And this is to look at, firstly, whether we could ever eliminate nuclear weapons. I mean, one of India's stated goals is to see if we could completely knock out weapons from this world and make it absolutely nuclear-free. Is that a reality? Is that going to happen in the next 10 years? Are we just pursuing a foolish dream? What's your take on this?
I don't think I'm competent to answer whether India's pursuit of the objective is appropriate or not. But I can speak to the question of whether the abolition of nuclear weapons in the next decade is a realistic outcome. I think it is an utterly unrealistic outcome. And a world in which nuclear weapons disappeared would probably turn out to be an unsafe world.
The gentleman there. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, Manoj Arora from New Delhi. Sir, our yesterday's speaker came to India without visa. I think this has become the habit of Americans to go to other countries without taking visa. They went to Afghanistan first, then to Iraq. Do you foresee any chance of their coming to India with a big team? Or if they come, they'll be first going to Pakistan or they'll straight come to India? And do we have the might to stop them and send them back? Thank you.
I think we should leave it as part of the internal security. You know, it's national defense may not have much to say, but I think broadly, in my opinion, we have the means, we have the system in place, and of course, nations such as ours, we also have to be flexible. It can happen to anybody, but as long as there are means and methods to deal with those and handle it, it's okay.
Ishu Machandani. A question to Ashey. Firstly, America has wowed us with their wonderful pinpoint bombing that we talked about and technology. I'd just like your opinion as involved in the national security in the United States. Would you like to comment on my personal fear that the large number of civilian casualties which the allies have chosen to ignore very well in the media in Iraq have increased the danger of retaliatory terrorism among the desperate and personally affected people in Iraq. Has it festered another 20 or maybe 40 Muhammad Attas who will not attack the Empire State Building or the Golden Gate Bridge, but would actually launch terrorism attacks in Topeka and Charlotte, something like that? Would you like to comment on that, please?
Well, I feel more comfortable commenting on the first part of the question than the second part of the question. As they would say in a courtroom, the second part of the question is speculative and requires me to provide judgments that are probably not supported by the evidence. But let me go to the first part of the question. If you look at the campaign in Iraq and you compare that with any previous military campaign that I can remember going back to the Second World War, I would think this is the campaign that has come as closest as one can imagine to securing the military objectives that were sought while minimizing civilian casualties. This doesn't mean that, there were no incidents of fratricide, there were no incidents of civilian casualties. I mean, this, after all, was a war, and there were unfortunate and dreadful consequences the moment one uses the military instrument in anger. But compared to the scale of the campaign, the extent of the casualties that were inflicted inadvertently on civilians was extraordinarily low. And in fact, when the history of this campaign is written, in fact, it would take, I think, a good deal of research to try and understand how exactly that outcome was managed. Now, whether the inadvertent casualties that did occur lead to further terrorism, your guess is as good as mine.
My name is A.C. Bose. I'm from the steel industry. I just like to mention that way back in 1972, I was under training in Germany and with a military industrial firm. And when we arrived there, we found out that this team from India which had gone, there was a circular which went around saying that no files or papers relevant to exports to India should be shown to us. This was just after the Bangladesh operations. And we later on found out from friendly people there that further circular had gone that all supplies to this part of the world, particularly sensitive ones concerning the Indian Air Force, or in fact even the Pakistan Air Force, were to be stopped forthwith. And nothing, no spares, no components would be supplied to this part of the world. That was, I think, a general thing which was undertaken both by the Europeans, Americans, and Russians. Everyone did that.
Is there a question?
No, I'm just asking, in that case, would you agree that it is worthwhile keeping these uneconomic defense capabilities that we have, manufacturing capabilities, going, even if economically it don't make sense?
If I understand right, we fight a war for whatever good reasons the country, the nation has decided, as you know about 71 war. And we achieve the objective, and the war gets over, and after that there are some restrictions imposed by so-called spare parts and so on. And then if you justify, therefore, should we have, therefore, defense capability at all, and should we have this? Should we ever have a war? Should we ever have to fight? I think they don't, that doesn't make sense. But it is a national strategy. Some are indigenous, some are not indigenous, some are imported. So it is a strategy within the country. How do we manage if so-and-so thing is stopped? You take Iran, for example. Iran is flying the F-14 today. You know, the so-called, the boycott or whatever, this thing is closed. They are flying the 747-200, whatever they have. They're not getting any spare parts from Boeing, as far as I know. And the Air Force is flying. How is that country managing? I don't know, really. So it is something to do with the will of the nation and all of us collectively. If we believe that we need a military, and I've tried to explain as for good reasons, why a country of our size and stature requires a military. We as a democracy took a the national decision to fight a war because it was thrust on us. You know 1971 history, and then we go for it. So we have to have the capability, and we do have now. But therefore, to say that do we spend on defense, I don't think that makes sense. I don't agree with it.
The gentleman.
Sorry, if I have not...
Is it worthwhile keeping even semi-idle defense capability, manufacturing capabilities in the country? Means that most likely it is worthwhile keeping even factories idle.
What is idle? Are you talking about the machines being idle? Or
yes, meaning that you probably are working at suboptimal capacities because you don't require those weapons normally. But because of this business of shutting off supply, you have to keep these.
But we don't sit tight. We have to find alternative means, and we continually do it. And we learn to live with this. And we learn to overcome this. That is a challenge. You know, like when the cryogenic engine was stopped, and we produced a cryogenic engine. So that is a challenge. And our country, I'm very proud to say that we are very good at it. And in fact, it's better that we stay half stomach, and that makes us perform. And we have brilliant minds and brilliant capability. And in fact, such measures actually speeds up our capabilities, and it brings us together as a nationhood. And I'm very proud of that, and I think it's a trigger.
Question.
First of all, my compliments to both the speakers for excellent presentations. My question is to Ashey
Please
Tellis.
identify yourself.
I'm Nitin Shukla. My question is to Ashey Tellis. Sir, you mentioned that world may remain unipolar for another 50 years. In that context, do you consider there is a possibility of emergence of united Europe as a balancing force? Thank you.
Yes, I do. There are a couple of interesting studies that are worth looking at. The best one, I think, has been done by William Wolfforth. And he looks at the prospect of a united Europe. He looks at China. He looks at other concentrations of power as well. And he assesses them along a variety of criteria. And when he totals them up in terms of what the Chinese would call comprehensive national power, that is large GNP, large per capita income, high levels of technology diffused throughout the system, as well as cutting-edge military capabilities, the evidence still seems to suggest that the US would be unparalleled. And a good metric to actually test this, particularly in the case of a united Europe, is to look at the European Union's difficulties with raising a euro core. They've been trying for the last 2 years now to raise a single core, which they've been unable to do. If you look at European contributions since the 1991 Gulf War, and you look at the studies that RAND did, technical analyses of European military contributions relative to American military contributions, the gap is so large, and if anything, is only getting worse. And so, looking at it today, if one looks at the trend lines, I don't think there's much to suggest that the European Union would become that kind of a competitor. It could become a competitor in other ways, but not in terms of comprehensive national power.